Dinner time in the Wild West, a phrase that might conjure visions of hearty feasts, sizzling pans over open fires, and the camaraderie of outlaws and cowboys sharing tales under the stars. Well, not quite. Let's begin with the setting, a dirt floor, maybe a few planks if you're lucky, a pot of beans simmering on a rusty stove, or in the true wilderness, a blackened cast iron kettle over a fire that won't stay lit because the wind simply refuses to cooperate. You'd think the food would be the worst part, but no, it's the sand. Everything, your spoon, your boots, your soul, is lightly seasoned with it. That gritty crunch in every bite is not salt. It's the desert reminding you who's boss. Beans were the cornerstone of the Western diet, not because they were delicious, but because they could survive the same punishment as the people eating them. Dried, cheap, and nearly impossible to ruin, unless you forgot to soak them overnight, which many did. Other staples included bacon, not the kind you fry up in a modern pan, but slabs of salt-cured pork fat, grayish in color and suspicious in scent. This was not artisanal charcuterie. This was meat that had been sweating in a saddlebag since last Tuesday. And then there was coffee. Glorious, scalding, eye-watering cowboy coffee. Grounds dumped into boiling water, stirred with a knife, and strained through, well, nothing. You just drank it and hoped for the best. Sometimes they added eggshells to settle the grounds. Sometimes they didn't. Either way, you chewed it as much as you sipped it. If you had money, and let's be honest, most didn't, you might afford a piece of hardtack. A biscuit that could also double as a weapon or building material. People have chipped teeth on these things. They were more enduring than marriages. Vegetables? Rare. Greens? Unlikely. Fresh anything? A fever dream. So you ate what was available, and if that included a bit of lizard or squirrel, so be it. Hunger was the ultimate seasoning, and hygiene was optional. Now, you might think a saloon offered a more refined experience. A wooden table, a tin plate, maybe even a rag to wipe your hands. But food in town wasn't necessarily safer. If the meat looked fresh, it probably wasn't. If it smelled fine, it was likely masked by molasses or overly generous portions of pepper. Water, of course, was a gamble. Clean water was a rarity, and dysentery traveled faster than gossip. Many turned to whiskey not for joy, but for survival. Killed whatever lurked in the river, probably. But dinner wasn't just about the food. It was about the silence afterward. That long, slow moment when the fire flickered low and your stomach rumbled in protest. Not because it was empty, but because it was confused. There were no smartphones, no YouTube, no evening news. Just stars, coyotes, and the knowledge that you'd be eating the same meal again tomorrow. And the next day, and the day after that. Sitting on a log, chewing lukewarm beans, maybe swatting at a fly that refused to die, you would think about home. A real bed, proper spoon, something green on your plate. You'd look across at your companion, if you had one, and say nothing, because words were a luxury, and frankly, you were too tired to use them. Besides, what was there to say? These beans taste like regret? He already knew. And after dinner, you cleaned your plate with whatever you had. A strip of shirt, a sleeve, maybe just your tongue. Then you tucked the tin plate away, knowing it might double as a shovel or shield tomorrow. Multipurpose was the rule, not the exception. Sleep came quickly on a full stomach. But out here, a full stomach didn't mean comfort, it meant weight. The beans sat heavy, the bacon whispered of indigestion, and the coffee guaranteed you'd be up at 2 a.m., swearing into the cold wind. Still, for all its indignities, the evening meal was sacred. It meant you'd made it another day. That despite the dust and danger, despite the questionable meat and boiled water, you were still alive. Barely. So when you imagine the Wild West, don't think of heroic cowboys leaning back against wagons under an orange sky, smiling with contentment. Think of a man hunched over a dented pot, trying to remember if that thing he just bit into was a pebble or a beetle, and realizing he doesn't care either way, because this is dinner, and this is the Wild West, and tomorrow it all starts again. Now let's take a moment to appreciate the miracle of running water. You know, the clean kind that comes out of your tap and doesn't contain horse droppings, snake skins, or a distant whiff of something that once lived and very recently died. In the Wild West, finding drinkable water was like winning the lottery, except instead of cash, your prize was not dying of dysentery. Wells were a luxury. Most settlers relied on rivers, creeks, or rainwater, assuming it actually rained. And even when they found water, it wasn't exactly thirst-quenching bliss. It might be muddy, stagnant, or suspiciously frothy. Boiling it helped, but fuel was limited, and most folks didn't have the time or the firewood. to make sure every cup was safe. So you'd just hope for the best and chug away. Of course, this meant people got sick. Constantly. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, fun little names for very unfun ends. Entire wagon trains were wiped out by contaminated water. And if you were lucky enough to live near a clean spring, you'd guard it like gold, because in the West, it practically was. Water also dictated where towns were built. Settlements sprang up near rivers or oases, and fights broke out over rights to streams. In fact, water wars weren't metaphorical. They were actual, gun-toting conflicts over who got to dip their bucket where. Now, if you thought your bottled water obsession made you picky, imagine having to inspect a puddle and decide, is it drinkable or will this be my last sip? Filters? No. Bottles? Nope. Just you, a tin cup, and a prayer to the dusty heavens. And forget about bathing regularly. That precious water was not wasted on vanity. People often bathed once a week, maybe. Some even prided themselves on going longer. A layer of dirt keeps the flies off, they'd say. Charming. Bathhouses existed in some towns, but they weren't common, and they cost money. So most folks just skipped it. You'd freshen up with a damp cloth if you were fancy, or just settle into your own grime like a living, breathing dust cake. Toilets? Let's not even get started. You'd be lucky to find an outhouse. Otherwise, it was a shovel, some privacy or not, and a strong sense of humility. But hey, at least you weren't alone. Everyone smelled bad. Everyone was thirsty. Everyone prayed to whatever spirit they believed in that the next mouthful of water wouldn't end them. A real bonding experience. So, could you survive just one day without clean, running water, refrigeration, or basic hygiene? That iced coffee in your hand right now would have been a mythic dream back then. 1 part coffee, 2 parts hallucination, and entirely dependent on how many bandits were between you and the nearest creek. In the Wild West, water wasn't just a resource. It was a gamble. And more often than not, it didn't end well. Ask ChatGPT. As the sun dipped behind the dry horizon and the skies turned a bruised shade of purple, something strange happened in the Wild West. The world didn't quiet down. It got worse. Nighttime in the West was not a cozy wind down with a warm blanket and a scented candle. It was a slow crawl into a shadowy unknown, where the only thing louder than the coyotes was your own heart beating just a little too fast. You see, electricity was for dreams and eastern cities. Out here, light came from fire, oil, and the occasional risky moonbeam. Towns had a few street lamps, dim, flickering things that didn't reach much farther than a drunk man's stumble. Out on the trail, total darkness. No porch lights, no car headlights, just the eerie, inky black of wilderness stretching in every direction. People didn't stay up late for fun. They stayed up for safety. If you were lucky enough to have a home, you'd bolt the door, wedge furniture against it, and still sleep with a gun nearby. Bandits preferred the cover of night. So did wild animals. And if you were camping outside, good luck. Every twig snap might have been a bobcat, or just the wind pretending to be one. Even towns weren't safe. Drunks poured out of saloons looking for fights or targets. Some towns had night sheriffs, but many didn't. So you'd rely on your own instincts and maybe the kindness of your neighbors, assuming you hadn't argued with them over fence lines or water earlier that week. And let's not forget the howling. The West had a soundtrack, and it wasn't peaceful. Coyotes, wolves, wind through splintered boards, the creaking of wooden signs. It all blended into a low, menacing lullaby. You'd try to sleep through it, wrapped in a blanket that was never quite warm enough, on a bed that never felt flat. If you were outside, it was the ground or a cold, creaky wagon floor, both of which had a special talent for making you question every life decision. People developed a sixth sense just to survive the night. Every shadow had potential. Every breeze carried threat. And insomnia wasn't a disorder, it was a survival tactic. If you slept too deeply, you might not wake up. So folks rested in shifts, huddled together, or simply stared at the stars and hoped the night passed without incident. And speaking of stars, yes, they were beautiful, spectacular, even. But after about 5 minutes of awe, the romance wore off when your horse started snorting nervously and your fire crackled like it was warning you of something. Stars don't keep you warm. They don't keep you safe. They just remind you how small and very, very alone you are out there. In the Wild West, nighttime didn't soothe the day's chaos. It simply offered a new kind, a quiet, creeping kind, the kind that whispered, "You might not make it to morning." And more often than not, someone didn't. So next time you turn off your lamp, pull your covers up, and drift off in safety, be grateful. because back then, nighttime wasn't the end of the day. It was the beginning of a whole new set of threats. Now, if you thought sleeping in the past was hard, imagine the people who didn't get to sleep at all. The night wasn't just a time to fear the dark. It was also a shift, and someone had to work it. And let's be honest, the jobs that needed doing after sundown were never the glamorous ones. Take the medieval night soil men, for example. That's a polite way of saying they were professional poop collectors. These unfortunate souls roamed the streets after dark with carts and buckets, scraping out cesspits and latrines because, well, you couldn't exactly do that sort of thing during the daytime rush. The smell alone would have cleared a market square. They were paid little, scorned by everyone, and yet essential. Without them, entire cities would have drowned in their own waste. Romantic, isn't it? Then there were the watchmen, the unpaid insomniacs of early cities. Armed with little more than a stick and a lantern, they were tasked with keeping streets safe at night. The trouble was, most weren't exactly trained. Many were old, drunk, or just unlucky. If a fire broke out, a thief crept by, or a murder occurred, the watchman's job was to shout really loudly and hope someone braver came along. It was less Batman, more tired grandpa yelling at shadows. In Victorian England, the job of resurrectionists, yes, that's what they were called, was to dig up freshly buried corpses under the cover of night and sell them to medical schools. Grave robbing wasn't just a creepy legend, it was a thriving trade. And while the idea of lurking through foggy graveyards with a shovel might seem like a Halloween tale, it was an actual, desperately low-paying career path for many poor men. You had to be quiet, quick, and not too bothered by the smell of death. Most people slept soundly above ground, while others dug their fortune beneath it. And let's not forget the lamplighters. In the days before electric bulbs, these workers wandered city streets each evening, lighting gas lamps with long poles, then returned again at dawn to put them out. It was a quiet, lonely life filled with cold air and stiff fingers. Rain? Snow? Didn't matter. The lamps had to burn or darkness would win. Nobody noticed the lamplighter unless they didn't show up. There were also night fishermen who braved stormy seas, miners pulling graveyard shifts deep underground, and mill workers stuck on rotating night schedules. Their bodies twisted into fatigue while the rest of the world slept. Many of them worked by candlelight or early oil lamps, which cast more shadows than illumination. The one thing all these jobs had in common: no one wanted them, and those who did them were usually either desperate or invisible, sometimes both. Today, we romanticize the idea of night owls and 24/7 hustle culture, but historically, if you were working through the night, it was not a badge of honor. It was a sign that you had no choice. So while we lie in bed scrolling our phones, sipping tea, or listening to sleep stories like this one, spare a thought for the historical night shift, the unsung, unwashed, and often unpaid few who trudged through mud, muck, and midnight to keep the world from collapsing by morning. Ask ChatGPT. Now, if you thought sleeping in the past was hard, imagine the people who didn't get to sleep at all. The night wasn't just a time to fear the dark. It was also a shift, and someone had to work it. And let's be honest, the jobs that needed doing after sundown were never the glamorous ones. Take the medieval night soil men, for example. That's a polite way of saying they were professional poop collectors. These unfortunate souls roamed the streets after dark with carts and buckets, scraping out cesspits and latrines because, well, you couldn't exactly do that sort of thing during the daytime rush. The smell alone would have cleared a market square. They were paid little, scorned by everyone, and yet essential. Without them, entire cities would have drowned in their own waste. Romantic, isn't it? Then there were the watchmen, the unpaid insomniacs of early cities. Armed with little more than a stick and a lantern, they were tasked with keeping streets safe at night. The trouble was, most weren't exactly trained. Many were old, drunk, or just unlucky. If a fire broke out, a thief crept by, or a murder occurred, the watchman's job was to shout really loudly and hope someone braver came along. It was less Batman, more tired grandpa yelling at shadows. In Victorian England, the job of resurrectionists, yes, that's what they were called, was to dig up freshly buried corpses under the cover of night and sell them to medical schools. Grave robbing wasn't just a creepy legend, it was a thriving trade. And while the idea of lurking through foggy graveyards with a shovel might seem like a Halloween tale, it was an actual, desperately low-paying career path for many poor men. You had to be quiet, quick, and not too bothered by the smell of death. Most people slept soundly above ground, while others dug their fortune beneath it. And let's not forget the lamplighters. In the days before electric bulbs, these workers wandered city streets each evening, lighting gas lamps with long poles, then returned again at dawn to put them out. It was a quiet, lonely life filled with cold air and stiff fingers. Rain? Snow? Didn't matter. The lamps had to burn or darkness would win. Nobody noticed the lamplighter unless they didn't show up. There were also night fishermen who braved stormy seas, miners pulling graveyard shifts deep underground, and mill workers stuck on rotating night schedules, their bodies twisted into fatigue while the rest of the world slept. Many of them worked by candlelight or early oil lamps, which cast more shadows than illumination. The one thing all these jobs had in common: no one wanted them, and those who did them were usually either desperate or invisible, sometimes both. Today, we romanticize the idea of night owls and 24/7 hustle culture, but historically, if you were working through the night, it was not a badge of honor. It was a sign that you had no choice. So while we lie in bed scrolling our phones, sipping tea, or listening to sleep stories like this one, spare a thought for the historical night shift, the unsung, unwashed, and often unpaid few who trudged through mud, muck, and midnight to keep the world from collapsing by morning. Ask ChatGPT. Sleep, you'd think, was a time to escape the horrors of the day. But not always. For some poor souls in the past, night was when the real danger began, because their bodies didn't know how to stay still, and their communities had no idea what to do with them. Let's talk about sleepwalking, or as some early texts called it, nocturnal wandering of the bewitched. Yes, in a time before brain scans or sleep studies, if you got up in the middle of the night and started walking around with your eyes open but your soul elsewhere, you were very likely to be accused of possession, witchcraft, or worse, lunacy. Because obviously, why else would someone walk barefoot onto a rooftop at 2 a.m., muttering to the moon? Medieval Europe was particularly suspicious of such behavior. Sleepwalkers were often restrained at night with ropes or tied to beds, just in case their midnight strolls took them into trouble, or through someone else's window. And if they injured someone while sleepwalking, well, that was a legal gray area except for when it wasn't. Sometimes you were punished anyway, because sleeping wasn't a good excuse when someone's goose was dead. Then there were the terrifying cases of parasomnious, violent, mysterious nighttime actions. Some people in the 17th and 18th centuries would scream, hit, or even fight imaginary threats in their sleep. Today, we'd recognize this as REM sleep behavior disorder. Back then, it was seen as demonic visitation, or, in some cultures, punishment from the ancestors. There are documented cases of people being exorcised because they kept fighting invisible intruders in their dreams. In parts of Eastern Europe, nighttime disturbances were deeply tied to vampire legends. If someone wandered at night, appeared pale, or showed signs of restlessness in bed, neighbors might suspect they were turning into a vampire. So imagine having sleep apnea and waking up gasping. Suddenly, your whole village thinks you're Nosferatu. Sleep wasn't just dangerous, it was a potential PR disaster. Let's not forget the victims of night terrors, often children, who would sit up suddenly in the middle of the night, eyes wide open, screaming in terror, completely unreachable by comforting words. To early households, it looked like possession or worse, a warning. In some places, special charms were hung over the bed to trap bad dreams before they reached the sleeper. Dream catchers weren't the only objects invented to soothe the unknown. Old Germanic households used iron keys, African communities burned herbs, and many cultures believed in night spirits that could only be kept at bay with salt. In elite households of 18th century France, somnambulism became something of a medical curiosity. Wealthy families called in doctors and philosophers to watch over sleepwalkers like living art. They were studied, documented, even displayed in salons as rare examples of the unconscious mind at work. Imagine sleepwalking becoming a dinner party attraction. Madame Dupont, do demonstrate your cousin's midnight trance. A polite round of applause follows as the poor woman reenacts her trauma for the guest. Of course, there was also the simple fear of falling asleep and never waking up. Not because of sleepwalking, but because you die in your sleep. Sudden death during the night was terrifyingly common. No warning, no illness, just gone. And without modern medicine, people often chalked it up to curses or spirits. Some would sleep sitting up to trick death into thinking they were awake. So sleepwalking, sleep screaming, sleep dying, history is full of ways the night betrayed the body. And for all our romantic notions of dreams and rest, the truth is that sleep was always something to be survived, not just enjoyed. Tonight, you can rest easy knowing that if you roll over and bump the wall, no one's going to assume you're a vampire. You'll just go back to sleep. But hundreds of years ago, that bump might have earned you a rope around your ankle, just in case you decided to go wandering again. If you thought the Wild West was just about cattle drives and tumbleweeds, think again. It was also a place where the local version of conflict resolution came with gunpowder, testosterone, and just enough ego to make a grown man weep into his whiskey. Welcome to the unspoken world of duels, where mornings could begin not with breakfast, but with a bullet. The rules were as loose as the tempers. You didn't need a grand offense. A sideways glance, an accidental elbow, or a comment about someone's mustache being slightly asymmetrical was enough to get called out. And while the movies show gallant duels with clean shots and honor preserved, the truth was messier. In reality, many of these honorable duels were ambushes in disguise. Guns jammed, nerves failed, and sometimes both duelists missed entirely, only to run behind barrels or barns until someone lost interest or bled out slowly. But regardless of outcome, it was all about saving face. Being called a coward in the Wild West was worse than death. It meant exclusion from everything: poker games, the local saloon, even the town gossip chain. And being respected, especially if you were a man, meant you had to be willing to put your life on the line over a spilled drink or a joke about your boots. Refuse to fight and you'd better start packing. Your days in that dusty town were numbered. But what if you were a woman? Well, women didn't duel, officially. Instead, they had their own social battlegrounds. Reputation, rumors, and sharp-tongued remarks at the general store could be just as dangerous as a bullet. One bad whisper about your character, and you'd find yourself ostracized from church pews, sewing circles, and suitors alike. Children, too, weren't spared the weight of this peculiar code of honor. Little boys were expected to man up by age 10, stand their ground in schoolyard scuffles, and never cry in public unless a rattlesnake was directly involved. And even then, they were expected to apologize afterward. The dueling culture extended beyond individual pride. Towns themselves sometimes had feuds, rival factions, land disputes, or economic grudges that played out like slow-burning, collective duels. The Hatfields and McCoys might have been the most famous, but they weren't alone. Settlements sometimes sent envoys to other towns just to remind them how much they still despised each other. It was charming in a disturbingly aggressive kind of way. To complicate things further, the justice system, such as it was, often turned a blind eye. Sheriffs were sometimes friends with the duelists. Judges, if they even showed up, would declare it a personal matter. A good lawyer was as rare as a toothbrush, and considerably less valued. So you can imagine, surviving the Wild West meant more than keeping your body fed and hydrated. You had to constantly navigate a minefield of egos, reputations, and impulsive declarations. It was less about law and more about lore, how others saw you, what stories they told, and how quickly you could spin your own version before someone else got to it. And don't think being peaceful gave you any protection. The quieter and more reserved you were, the more suspicious people became. A man who didn't drink, curse, or shoot at things for fun was clearly hiding something, or worse, from somewhere back east. The pressure to perform a rugged identity was relentless. You couldn't just be tough, you had to show it constantly. Walk wrong, talk wrong, or get caught reading poetry instead of shooting bottles, and you'd become the town's next ghost story. There was no room for nuance in a world powered by bravado. So while we might romanticize the dueling culture today, imagine ourselves as cool, steely-eyed gunfighters in leather dusters. The reality was a constant performance of masculinity, paranoia, and danger. Duels weren't about honor. They were about survival. And as with most things in the Wild West, the only real rule was, don't get yourself killed being polite. Now go ahead, sip your tea, roll over, and imagine explaining to your 21st century HR department why you were late. Sorry, I had to duel Dave from accounting over a snide remark about my boots. In the Wild West, that was just another Tuesday. Now, if your teeth survived the rock-like biscuits and sour whiskey of the Wild West, then congratulations. But eventually, something would go wrong. A tooth would crack or throb, or turn black and remind you just how fragile the human body is without modern care. And in those dusty frontier towns, your options were limited, to say the least. The local dentist might also be the town's blacksmith, or the barber, or perhaps the undertaker moonlighting with pliers and a strong drink. There were no clean white offices, no Novocaine, no hygienist smiling gently while asking you to rinse. No, here, your appointment came with the smell of horses, rusted tools, and the gentle clink of whiskey bottles. Pain relief, a shot of whiskey and a leather belt to bite down on. The procedure, grip, yank, pray. If you were lucky, it came out in one piece. If not, well, they'd just dig around a little longer. Screaming was common. Passing out was better. In the absence of real dental tools, a blacksmith's tongs, a pair of household pliers, or even a hunting knife might be used. Sanitation was a concept yet to ride into town. Infections were frequent. Swollen faces became badges of survival. And abscesses? Left untreated, they could turn fatal. Some entrepreneurial types did travel around claiming to be trained dentists, with satchels of potions and polished tools, putting on little public shows of dental bravery, yanking a man's molar while the crowd watched in gory fascination. A performance of pain with little guarantee of quality. Tooth powders were made of crushed charcoal, salt, or even brick dust. Toothbrushes, if you had one, were shared among the family. Oral hygiene was not a personal affair. It was often a community tragedy. Children lost teeth early. Adults carried on with stumps and stench. Gums receded, and pain became a constant whisper. By 40, if you still had your molars, you were blessed. By 50, you may have forgotten what chewing properly felt like. But hey, you look tough. A few missing teeth just meant you were a real cowboy, or a saloon regular, or someone who knew how to survive, however painfully. The Wild West didn't care about your smile. It only cared whether you could still shoot straight. So go ahead, try surviving a day in the Wild West. But don't smile too wide. That is, unless you're fine with the blacksmith poking around your gums with the same pliers he used on a mule this morning. Oh, you might think that after surviving the brutal sun, the rancid coffee, the toothless dinner conversations, and the questionable barbershop surgeries, the Wild West would finally offer you a bit of peace at night. A soft bed, a starry sky, maybe a moment to breathe. But no, when night fell, the real trouble began. Outlaws didn't work day shifts. They came alive in the dark. When the saloons got louder, the poker games got riskier, and your life expectancy plummeted with each drink poured. Gunslingers didn't schedule their duels for sunrise. They liked the cover of night, when the shadows stretched long, and the witnesses were either drunk or too afraid to speak. Sleep, if it came at all, arrived on a creaky straw mattress crawling with lice. If you were lucky, you had a roof. If not, the stars above offered beauty, yes, but also coyotes, snakes, and the very real possibility of waking up with a scorpion in your boot. You didn't undress to sleep. You didn't even take off your boots. You kept your gun close and your back to a wall, because bandits and drunken neighbors didn't always knock. The wind howled through the streets, carrying dust and secrets. Horses whinnied nervously. Somewhere, someone was always shouting. Somewhere else, someone was always bleeding. And then there were the fires. Entire towns could vanish overnight. Lanterns knocked over in wooden buildings, flames spreading like gossip in a crowded saloon. There were no fire departments, just buckets, panic, and prayers. If you'd managed to rent a room in a boarding house, don't get too comfortable. You might be sharing it with rats, strangers, or the owner's brother who just got out of jail and doesn't like to be woken early. And God help you if you needed to relieve yourself. There were no indoor bathrooms, just a cold, dark walk to the outhouse with a lantern and a prayer that no snake had decided to nest there. Outhouses were riddled with splinters, spiders, and the distinct possibility that you'd fall in if the boards were old. It happened, more often than you'd think. So yes, surviving a day in the Wild West was one thing. But surviving a night, that was a whole different battle. And it wasn't one with grit or guns. It was one with luck. The kind of luck that meant your bed didn't collapse, your neighbor didn't rob you, and the fire stayed in the fireplace instead of swallowing the town whole. Sleep tight, cowboy. Just don't close both eyes. Ask ChatGPT. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a journey into the myth of the Wild West, a place people often imagine as thrilling, sun-drenched, full of noble cowboys, and cinematic standoffs. But in reality, it was mostly dust, and starvation, and dysentery. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy relaxing with me on these slow, strange journeys through history. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love seeing who's falling asleep with one eye open around the world. Now get comfortable, dim the lights, and imagine yourself waking up in a wooden shack with no running water, no internet, and no idea how to spell cholera, let alone survive it. Welcome to your new life, on the frontier. It's morning in the Wild West, and by morning, I mean about 4:45 a.m., because that's when the roosters crow and your neighbor's cow starts screaming again. You're in a one-room cabin that smells like wood smoke, sweat, and whatever died in the corner weeks ago, but no one has had the energy to investigate. Your pillow is a burlap sack, stuffed with hay, which you now realize has a small family of beetles building a commune inside it. You try to sit up, but the bed creaks like a coffin lid, because, in fact, it used to be one. It's cold. Not chilly, bone-chillingly, brain-freezingly cold. Because insulation hasn't been invented yet. Or at least, not for people who live 86 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by rattlesnakes and optimism. Your first task of the day is to check if the water bucket is frozen solid. It is. Congratulations. You'll be brushing your teeth with sand again. Let's take a moment to talk about hygiene in the Wild West. It didn't exist. Baths were something you took once a month, or whenever the nearest creek unfroze. Whichever came first. Soap was made from leftover animal fat, ashes, and hope, and it smelled like both. You'd scrub your body down with a rough rag and try not to think about the part of your back you haven't reached since 1872. Toothbrush? That's cute. Try chewing on the end of a stick, or just rinse your mouth with whiskey and call it patriotism. As for deodorant, well, let's just say, everyone smelled like boiled denim and despair, which really made dating special. Breakfast in the Wild West was creative. If you were lucky, you had salt pork. If you were slightly less lucky, you had a sack of hardtack biscuits, which were essentially edible bricks. Crack one open and you might find a bug. Crack it harder and you might find two. Coffee was a sacred ritual. It was brewed with gritty water over an open flame and tasted like burnt leather. But it was hot, and it was bitter, just like you. Now, time to head outside. The wind howls like a dying banshee and the sun has barely peeked over the horizon. You step out into the mud, which is, surprise, actually frozen manure, and immediately slip, because of course, your only shoes are stitched together from old canvas and stubbornness. Your job for the day? That's funny. You do all the jobs. You chop firewood. You haul water. You fix the roof with old nails and borrowed time. And if you're on a cattle drive, you're up before the sun, shoveling something unmentionable while the cows contemplate your weakness. Maybe you're a pioneer, maybe a blacksmith, or a saloon keeper. Whatever you are, one thing is certain. You haven't sat down in 6 hours, and your back sounds like a xylophone made of regret. And if you think you'll find solace in town, think again. Towns were barely towns, more like a few buildings and a cloud of flies. There's a general store that sells everything from nails to licorice to jars of mystery. A saloon that smells like spilled beer and broken dreams. And maybe, if you're lucky, a doctor. Except the doctor is also the barber, and the dentist, and probably the undertaker. And he only owns one pair of pliers, which he sterilizes by wiping them on his apron. By now, you're probably wondering, when do we rest? We don't, because if you sit down for too long, your pants freeze to the bench. And if you sleep too deeply, raccoons steal your food. So you stay alert, because that's the only way you survive. Or at least, delay death until Thursday. As the sun sets, and the chill creeps back into your bones, you eat a dinner of beans. Just beans. They've been your dinner for 12 nights in a row. You lean back, listening to the coyotes wailing in the distance like a ghost choir. And you realize, this isn't a movie. There's no background music, just creaking wood, howling wind, and your stomach preparing to riot. You crawl into bed again, under a wool blanket that weighs more than you do. You curl up, cold, exhausted, and slightly broken, and you whisper to yourself, I miss Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi hasn't even been born yet. So you cry softly into your beetle pillow, and wait for the rooster to ruin your life again. Let's imagine it's morning now. The sun, a cruel and blinding disk, crawls over the horizon like a reluctant god. You've survived the night, barely. Your mouth is dry, your back aches from sleeping on lumpy straw, and your skin smells like regret and horses. You're starving, and it's time for breakfast. The glamour of the Wild West meal. No farm-fresh eggs, no artisan sourdough toast, just a dented tin plate, half full with beans that were probably soaked in water from a nearby creek where a possum drowned last week. The bacon, charred on one side, raw on the other. You chew carefully because last time you didn't, you chipped a molar on a piece of unrendered gristle. The coffee is called cowboy coffee, which sounds rustic and romantic until you drink it. It's made by boiling grounds in a soot-blackened pot directly over the fire. No filter, no measuring. Just toss in a handful of coffee, maybe a horseshoe nail or two, and wait until it's thick enough to chew. Tastes like burned mud and sadness. You drink it anyway, because it's the only thing between you and complete physical collapse. And then, of course, your stomach rumbles. Loudly, menacingly. This is not hunger. This is danger. Because the creek water used for the beans, it was full of bacteria. Welcome to the grand tradition of dysentery, a hallmark of frontier dining. is not just a disease, it's a lifestyle. There is no plumbing here, just an outhouse if you're lucky, or a hole behind a bush, or maybe nothing at all. And when dysentery hits, it hits with speed and fury. A biological betrayal. You thought this was the rugged life, freedom, fresh air, and open plains. But instead, you're crouched behind a cactus, shaking, sweating, and rethinking all your life choices. And guess what? There's no toilet paper, no soap, no privacy, just flies. So many flies, always the flies. Back at the campfire, someone offers you more beans. You politely decline. They laugh and tell you to toughen up. You consider hitting them with your tin plate, but you don't have the energy. You're too dehydrated. You drink more of the coffee. It doesn't help. It never does. But this is the frontier. There are no refunds, no Yelp reviews, no smoothie bars around the corner. This is where breakfast doesn't nourish. It tests your will to live. The sky is growing brighter. You squint through the dust. You're alive technically, and it's not even 8 a.m. Congratulations. You've made it to breakfast in the Wild West. Barely. Now that breakfast has tried to kill you, it's time to get dressed. This sounds simple, but remember, this is not modern life. There is no wardrobe, no mirror, no soft hoodie waiting with open arms. There's just a pile of rough, itchy clothing that smells like wood smoke and horse sweat. Your shirt? Unbleached cotton, possibly burlap, possibly an old sack someone died in. It's stiff, crusted with yesterday's sweat, and absolutely not washed. Because washing clothes is for people with water, soap, and a reason to care. The shirt scratches your arms as you pull it on. You pretend not to notice. You lie to yourself. Next, trousers. Ah yes, the legendary denim pants of the Wild West. Except, these aren't your comfortable, pre-faded, stretchy modern jeans. These are raw denim, thick as canvas, unforgiving, and cut for someone who's been riding horses since the age of 4. You haven't. You try to pull them up and realize they were not made for walking. They were made for surviving the apocalypse on horseback. Every seam chafes. Every movement pinches. There's no underwear. No elastic. Just you, denim, and the slow erosion of comfort. Boots? Heavy leather, cracked and stiff. You stuff your feet in. Blisters already forming. The boots don't care. They were probably made from a cow that died of rabies and now seeks revenge. No socks either. Those are for rich people or, more realistically, people not living inside a John Steinbeck fever dream. Then comes the hat. Yes, the iconic wide-brimmed cowboy hat. It's not stylish. It's not romantic. It's just a sweaty dome shield covered in grime, dust, and possibly lice. But it's your only defense against the unrelenting sun. You now resemble someone who's either about to wrangle cattle or be buried in the dirt. And for accessories, a bandana around your neck, not for style, but to breathe through when dust storms sweep across the plains like angry gods. You'll use it to wipe your face, your tools, your hands, and possibly your tears. There is no deodorant, no moisturizer, just your natural musk, and everyone else's. The scent of the Wild West is sweat, leather, horse dung, and despair. You might be wondering why no one bothers to clean themselves. The answer is water. Water is precious. It's used for drinking, not for bathing. A full bath might happen once a month, maybe, and when it does, everyone shares the same tub, in the same water, in order of importance. If you're low in the pecking order, you bathe last. In broth, you look down at yourself now, dusty, blistered, irritated, and already sweating through the only shirt you own. You haven't even left camp yet, and you already feel like a crusty old prospector shouting at squirrels. The sun climbs higher. The dust begins to rise, and you, poor, overdressed soul, are ready to face the day. A day that will not care how you look, or how you feel, or how long until your skin stops itching. You are now officially dressed for the Wild West. Survival rating? Still low. Now that you're fully dressed like a chafing sack of potatoes, it's time to start your day's work. But let's be clear. Work in the Wild West isn't your cozy laptop job with ergonomic chairs and Slack notifications. No, here work means manual labor, sweat, sunburn, and the ever-present risk of sudden and inconvenient death. Let's say you're a cowboy. That sounds exciting, right? Wrong. Being a cowboy means waking up before the sun to check on cattle who hate you, wander off constantly, and are somehow always standing where a rattlesnake lives. You ride for hours through dry plains, in leather gear that hasn't been cleaned since the last cholera outbreak. Every part of you is sore. Your horse hates you. You hate your horse. A beautiful friendship. And the cow pies. Endless cow pies. You will step in them. You will sleep near them. You will eventually stop caring. Maybe you're not a cowboy. Maybe you're a blacksmith. Great. Now you get to stand next to a fire all day while hammering metal until your arms feel like wet noodles and your hearing starts to fade. You'll inhale fumes, get burns, and occasionally step on a hot nail and say words no Bible would approve of. Maybe you're a pioneer wife. Congratulations. Now you do everything, from cooking and cleaning to milking cows and tending to sick children while fighting off snakes, rats, and existential dread. You'll bake bread in an oven the temperature of hell's sauna and sweep a dirt floor. Yes, dirt. The floor is made of dirt. You sweep it. Maybe you're a shopkeeper in a one-horse town. Your job is to survive armed customers, barter with drunk miners, and hope the roof doesn't cave in during a windstorm. There's no security system. Your security is a shotgun and praying people like you. Or maybe you're one of the unlucky ones, a gold miner. Then your day is nothing but digging, sifting, aching, and hoping you don't die in a cave-in or from drinking mercury-laced water. And spoiler, you will find no gold. Not today. Probably not ever. The man who sells you shovels makes more money than you. Whatever job you have, here's the key detail. No one cares if you're tired. If you stop, things die. Cattle wander off cliffs. Bread doesn't bake. Your roof collapses. The desert claims you. There are no days off. No holidays. No mental health breaks. Just the constant ticking of time and the knowledge that rest is a luxury for the dead or the rich. And then there's the heat. The endless, dry, soul-cracking heat. There is no SPF. No sunglasses, just you, the blazing sun, and a wide-brimmed hat that's been through 12 dust storms and one bar fight. Speaking of dust, everything is covered in it. Your tools, your boots, your face, your teeth. You could open your mouth and pour out a desert. It grits between your fingers, gets in your food, and settles into your lungs with a quiet, wheezing intimacy. And still, the work continues, because if you stop, the land wins. And the land doesn't care about you. By midday, your skin is sunburned, your shirt is soaked through, and your hands are raw. There's no lunch break, just a slab of jerky and a can of lukewarm beans. You eat standing up, squinting into the sun like an underpaid prophet. This is the Wild West, a place where earning a living often meant earning a slow, dusty march toward death. And somehow, this is only half the day.